This is my AliExpress Gaming PC. I built it out of parts I bought from AliExpress, obviously. So, can you actually game on a PC built using a bunch of cheap and salvaged PC components from China? Well, I don't want to spoil the surprise, so you'll just have to watch and find out. Roll the intro! Hello there, I'm TechDweeb. Hello and welcome. Thanks for clicking on the video. I've had some, shall we say, mixed experiences buying cheap PC stuff from AliExpress. It usually goes one of three ways. Either 1, I get the thing and it works great and I'm happy because I saved some money. Or 2, I get the thing and it's kinda junky and it feels like it's barely worth the cheap price I paid. Or 3, I don't get the thing and then I have to go through the super enjoyable process of filing a dispute and dealing with a seller who assures me it's in the mail even though it's been like 3 months. And maybe I'll get my money back and maybe I won't, but hey, what are you gonna do, write a letter or something? I'm gonna tell you right now that this stuff, this bundle I got, turned out to be the first option. It's really good, and I'll show you that in a few minutes, but let me quickly go over what we have here. This is a bundle that I bought from AliExpress. It was supposed to be a complete PC bundle. It came with basically everything you needed to build a PC except for the case. However, shortly after I placed the order, they told me they can't ship the power supply to my country, which I was actually super happy about because the idea of using a cheap Chinese power supply in a gaming PC and potentially burning my house down and also killing my cat in the process wasn't super appealing, although I do kinda hate my cat to be honest. Oh come on, you hate me too, don't you? Yes you do. We hate each other equally. It's not a contest. Don't make this about you again, you self-centered little... What was I even saying? Oh yeah, the bundle. Like I said, this was like a year ago, and I looked before making this video and it seems like AliExpress doesn't sell this sort of bundle anymore. Maybe it's because of all the exploding power supplies. Who's to say? But you can still buy the CPU, motherboard, cooler, SSD, and RAM bundles. And you can buy old used graphics cards separately on AliExpress. And it all comes to about the same price that I paid for all this. I looked up the price before I made the video, and the stuff here, the motherboard, the CPU, cooler, and RAM, this is 130 bucks. The motherboard is a B75 chipset. It's brand new, but it uses a salvaged chipset chip. Linus did a video on these Chinese motherboards with salvaged chipsets if you want to know more about them. I'm not gonna bother explaining the technical stuff. I'll show you the motherboard's BIOS a little bit later in the video. The CPU is an i5-3570, which is super old. It's like 10 years old at this point. So it's a used CPU, obviously, but as you'll see in a bit, it's actually not bad at handling modern games. And it came pre-installed in the socket with the cooler attached. So there you go. They built like a quarter of my PC for me. And we have our RAM here. This is 12 gigabytes of 8-byte brand DDR3 RAM rated for 1600 megahertz. The SSD was a 128 gigabyte cheap Chinese no-name brand NVMe SSD, but I swapped that out for a 500 gigabyte NVMe SSD of my own choosing because I wanted to use the cheap Chinese SSD in a different PC. And my bundle came with this used GPU. But if you're going to buy a GPU from AliExpress, you can get a cheap GPU for like $100. This one is a GTX 750 Ti. I made a video on this GPU. I'll include a link to that video in the description below if you want to see more examples of how it performs. It arrived in good shape, and it has worked fine for me, so I have no complaints. I don't think a 750 Ti is a great choice in 2022, considering that it doesn't have full DX12 support. Something like a GTX 960 would be a better choice if you're thinking about building a setup like this, but even though some games won't work on the 750 Ti, there are a lot of games that do. New games even, as you'll see in a bit. So that's the stuff. And what you want to know is, what can it do? Can you really buy a motherboard, CPU, GPU combo made of salvaged components from China and actually game on it? Well, I suppose we need to slap this crap together as a PC to answer that, don't we? Obviously, it didn't come with a case, so I used my favorite cheap case, the Golden Field 21 Plus. I also had to supply my own power supply from my power supply. And I tossed in a cheap RGB fan kit from Amazon, because it's not a gaming PC if it doesn't have RGB. We all know that. I'm not going to show you a full build of this. It turned out great. It's small and cool looking, but you don't actually care, do you? Let's get to how it performs, and I'll temper your expectations. This isn't going to be running all the latest and greatest games at 1080p high settings. Think of this as a 900p low settings setup. At least in modern games. You'll get away with 1080p or medium settings in some somewhat older games, and obviously 1080p high settings in very old games. But yeah, just keep in mind that the goal of a super cheap budget setup like this is just to be able to play games, even if we have to make sacrifices. Oh, speaking of the budget, the grand total of this entire build was $340, including the case of power supply and the RGB fans and stuff. So let's see how we did for that price, shall we? Windows works, as expected. There's my i5 3570, 4 cores, 4 threads with a base clock of 3.4 GHz and a boost up to 3.8 GHz. My RAM is 12 GB of DDR3 running at 1600 MHz, dual channel. And there's my GPU, this GTX 750 Ti, running the latest drivers. Which is nice, because most of the GPUs from the 700 series, all the Kepler cards, they don't get updated drivers anymore. But the 750 Ti is a Maxwell card, so it's still getting driver updates, for now at least. Shall we test some games? Starting off, as always, with Shadow of the Tomb Raider, I went with 900p, medium settings, and I got an average of 27 FPS. I think I'm going to go with 900p as the default for the most part for most of these games. I think with hardware like this, 900p, medium settings is going to be your sweet spot. Not super low like 720p low settings, but that GTX 750 Ti isn't going to be able to handle 1080p. At least in any somewhat newer or more demanding titles. This game looks good like this, but 27 FPS isn't quite what I want it to be playing at. I'd rather play at 30 FPS minimum, so I made use of some resolution scaling to bring the resolution down to 75% scale, which brings it down to like around 800p, and at this resolution, we did just fine. Our average went up to 32 FPS, so I'm happy with this. I'd play like this. I've said it before and I'll say it again. These third-person action exploration games, they play fine at 30 FPS, especially if you're playing with a controller. Sitting back on your couch or whatever. Yeah, not sub 900p isn't the crispest visuals in the world, but you can play the game and enjoy it like this. That's what matters. Here's a bit of an older game, The Witcher 3, and I know I've said I'll be sticking with 900p, but this one I decided to lower the settings instead of the resolution. In my experience, this game at low settings still looks amazing, and there's a lot of text in the game with the reading and the inventory interface and stuff, so going with native 1080p is a big help. As you can see, the game really does look great. And we got an average of 44 FPS, which is really, really solid. It's totally playable, totally enjoyable. And that's what you can expect from an AliExpress PC parts bundle. You're not going to run the latest and greatest titles at max graphics or anything, but you can game. You'll be able to play through The Witcher 3 and have a great experience. And that's something. No! Here's Spooderman Remastered. This is a brand new game. It was just released on the PC, and a very fun game, I might add. I just love Spooderman. I was running this at 900p, and I did need to make use of balanced FSR 2.0, and we went with the low preset. And again, this game really still looks amazing at low. Too good, actually. Going down to the lowest settings didn't really allow us to get our FPS super high. I would have been fine with sacrificing some more visuals to get the FPS up. Only 32 FPS, but it was a bit on the stuttery side. Still, not bad, not bad. It's playable. This game ran at 30 FPS on the PS4, so hey, at least you're getting a console-like experience with this sort of setup, with the added benefit of it being a computer as well. I doubt this setup will stand the test of time. This game is more CPU intensive than lots of the games, and it really shows in the performance. That older i5, it can barely keep up with this game, so I imagine in the future it just won't be enough to play modern games. But for now, at least, it's getting the job done. Just barely, though. let's get into some God of War. But nope. No, it doesn't even launch. And this is what I was afraid of. Any game that requires DX12 isn't going to even work on this old GTX 750 Ti. There are other bundles on AliExpress that have GTX 960s, and that would be a much better option. This 750 Ti it was a great card, and it's held up surprisingly well over the years, but nothing lasts forever. Time to pull out the big guns. Cyberjug 2077. I started at 900p, low settings, low crowd density, and it wasn't running amazing. 20 FPS average. That's like not really playable. It didn't feel very good at these settings. I don't think you'd want to play like this. Maybe you'd be able to get away with 720p, but I didn't want to go that low. Like I said, my goal is to go with no less than 900p on all these tests. So I enabled FSR, going with balanced FSR, and the game became much more playable. This area that I'm testing, this is the Cherry Blossom Market, and it's a very intensive area. So this is pretty much a worst case scenario. We went up to 33 FPS, and you know, it's actually playable. You're not going to be blown away by the graphics at these low settings. It sort of looks a little smudgy, but hey, just make it a role-playing thing. Pretend you're a character who lost their glasses, and it'll be immersive. In honesty, it still looks okay. And it plays okay. Over 30 FPS at least, which is all you can really expect from a lower-end PC like this. But just the fact that it's playing Cyberjug, you could play this game and not have a terrible time, that's about all we could ask from a Chinese PC parts bundle, I think.
Jesus Christ!
Come on, Crystal. Your destiny.
We gotta try GTA 5, right? This game is so well optimized, it runs on almost any setup, so it wasn't a surprise when I was able to get 78 FPS average running at 1080p with high settings. I've said it before, like every single time I test this game in my videos. You're probably sick of hearing me say it, but whatever, I'm gonna keep saying it. I think this game looks awesome, considering how well it runs. Rockstar set the bar very high with optimization with this game. You can run this on some super low-end hardware, and even at low settings, it looks really good. And it plays great too. It's such a fun game. And GTA Online is still a super popular online game, so it's still totally relevant. If you want to play this sort of game, or even like esports games, then you'll be just fine with an AliExpress motherboard GPU combo like this. Time for some Doom. Here's another game we were able to go with 1080p, medium settings, and we got an average of 52 FPS, which wasn't quite as high as I'd usually like. I like this game to be over 60 when I play, but I was impressed that we were getting close to that at 1080p, medium settings. This game is so freaking fun, and it's really, really awesome looking. You don't need to run at 1080p or even medium settings though. The game still looks great at 900p, low settings, so if you have a high refresh rate monitor, that's probably what I'd run with, because the action in the game is more important than the sightseeing, in this game at least.
Demonic presence at unsafe level.
Real quick, let's check out the BIOS. I don't know what you want to see in here. This is a B75 chipset with a very generic American Megatrend BIOS front end. There's a ton of options. I'm gonna be honest, I don't know what more than half this stuff does. So rather than listening to me fail at explaining this stuff, I'm gonna quickly tab through all the pages just so you can see what options are available. And if you know what CPU C6 reports are, then maybe you'll find it useful to see what's on here. Oh, one thing I will mention is that this motherboard does not support sleep states. The PC doesn't sleep, so I just enabled hibernation to use instead of sleep, and that gets the job done for me. So, should you build an AliExpress Gaming PC Bundle from China? Well, I don't know. Do you need a PC? Do you have $340 to spend? Do you think this is a good level of performance compared to the price? I think it's pretty good. I say if you're comparing this against the kind of PC you can build from new components, you'd be hard-pressed to build a PC that can outperform this AliExpress PC for this price if you're buying new stuff. But here's the thing. These aren't new components. Some of them are used. This motherboard is mostly new, just a salvaged chipset chip, but it's like 95% new. The CPU isn't new, but CPUs don't typically burn out or anything, so I say that's not going to be a problem. The RAM and the SSD are both new, and obviously the case and the power supply and the fans all new, but that GPU isn't new, not at all. It's likely a used internet cafe GPU that's been heavily put through lots of long gaming sessions. The seller says it's been repasted, so that's good at least. But there's no guarantee that it'll last a long time. It's probably fine, but you definitely don't get the assurance of a new GPU. So considering that the PC isn't all new, I'd say that compared to the kind of PC that you could get on the used market for this price, no, it's not a good deal. You can find some pretty darn good gaming experiences for $340 out there in the used market. Obviously they'll be ugly and dusty and won't have any new components, so it sort of feels like a PC built from AliExpress components sits in the middle. It's not new, but it's not used. And at the price you pay, I think it's fine. It's not a mind-blowing, oh my god, you should definitely go this route if you're building a PC kind of deal, but it's pretty good. It's an option, and I can vouch for the usability. I've had this PC for about a year now. I've had this on my downstairs living room TV to play simple games and as a media center and emulation PC, and it served me well. And if your needs aren't over the top, if you just need a simple, cheap PC to run older or less demanding games, I dare say it'll serve you well too. Well, that brings us to the end, I guess. Not quite the mind-blowing conclusion you were hoping for, but I hope this was helpful, or at least entertaining. Please let me know in the comments below. Have you ever bought one of these weird Chinese salvaged motherboards? Are you thinking about getting one? Are you surprised that an i5 3570 and a GTX 750 Ti can handle lots of modern games, albeit at lower resolutions and settings? I'm pleasantly surprised, but I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. And while you're down there, if you like the video, clicking that thumbs up button's all you gotta do. And subscribe, all that good stuff. I'm TechDweeb, see you next time. Bye-bye.